Chapter 901, The Mutated Paper Figurine. Klein didn't bring Isaac's copper whistle directly above the gray fog this time, but he did plan on doing it the same way he did back when he first divined the mutated sun-sacred emblem. He completed it by using an object's projection. Although this would decrease the accuracy to a certain extent, causing the divination to fail at obtaining any effective revelation, it guaranteed that the item was undamaged, thanks to the gray fog being an intermediary layer. He still recalled the time back when he divined the origins of the black ear that came from the listener. This sealed artifact had suffered retaliation from the true creator, causing it to crumble and reform into a charm. Therefore, with the suspicion that the divination result could point to Death's corpse or other remains, a godhood power of a sequence 0 that had long perished but was still capable of changing the Berserksea's environment, Klein decided to leave Isaac's copper whistle in the real world and divine using a projection. This was to avoid the possibility of damaging such an important item. After all, Death and the true creator were at the same level. As for why Klein dared to directly use Grozel's travels to divine its origins, it was because the ancient god, Dragon of Imagination, had long since perished. Its corresponding characteristic had likely been inherited by someone else and changed hands several times. Furthermore, the book itself was extremely strong. Even a blast of the sea god's scepter at full strength could hardly damage it. By the same logic, Mr. Dorr was likely only a king of angels, and was in an exiled and quarantined state. He could only barely send out his ravings, making it impossible for him to deal any actual damage.
With the help of the power of the mysterious space above the gray fog, I can quickly recover from the damage and corruption without any lasting repercussions. If Isaac's copper whistle were to be destroyed, it would truly be gone. I wouldn't be able to contact Mr. Isaac again and use it to attract the undead. I won't even be able to carry it around with me.
Klein very calmly and skillfully held the copper whistle's projection and the paper with the divination statement in hand before leaning back into his chair. Half closing his eyes, he chanted softly in a state of cogitation,
"The reason for this copper whistle's abnormality today."
After chanting it 7 times, Klein fell into a deep sleep and entered the dream world. After an unknown period of time, he saw a dark and gloomy mausoleum. He saw a dark-colored staircase that extended downwards and coffins placed around it. The coffins were all open with dead bodies in them. On their backs grew white feathers that were stained with pale yellow oil. Even in the dream, Klein found the scene abnormally familiar, as though he had once seen it before. At that moment, he seemed to smell the putrid smell of rot and hear the slow breathing of some object. He felt that the darkness in the mausoleum was thickening, giving him an acute feeling of deathly silence. Suddenly, ravings that were both loud and soft sounded at the same time. The corpses in the coffins with white feathers on their backs floated up together, and using their half-rotten and half-pale faces, they looked out of the dream. With his heart skipping a beat, Klein lost control of his heart, as though it was grabbed by invisible hands and was ripped straight out of his chest. During this process, his dream collapsed into fragments as it returned to nothingness. And the final scene Klein saw was that not only were the corpses growing white feathers on their backs and other parts of their body, there were thin, illusory black tubes that stabbed into their bodies. They extended deep into the mausoleum where an endless, cold, sinister black fog emanated. The black fog slowly contracted and expanded, producing panting sounds. When the commotion from this scene landed in Klein's eyes and ears, the color in his skin rapidly drained. It left his skin rotting and overflowing with pus. It made his pores produce thin and dense white feathers that were stained with pale yellow oil. It made the projection of Isaac's copper whistle in his hand shatter into a blob of black fog. The long, mottled table in the ancient palace rotted and collapsed as the 22 high-backed chairs were enveloped by white feathers as though they had a life of their own. Seeing the endless gray fog silently churn, the mysterious space above this gently stirred, quickly restoring everything to normal. It was as though nothing had happened. Klein, who had collapsed to the side of the chair, reached out his hand and grabbed the table leg and slowly stood up. Sitting back in his chair, He exhaled slowly. He rubbed his temples and subconsciously did a comparison.
Weaker than the true creator and eternal blazing sun, but stronger than Mr. Door. However, I'm not sure if it's because the latter was exiled and quarantined, which minimized the amount of power transmitted over. Why am I thinking about these comparisons? It's not like I'm their match. It will still be the same even if I become a demigod. Unfortunately, I didn't directly see the object hidden in the black fog. Otherwise, I might be able to obtain some potion formulas or mysticism knowledge.
Klein felt a baffling sense of regret as he cast his gaze to the side of his chair. He saw an illusory black fog floating there. It was the remnants after the shattering of the projection of Azik's copper whistle.
There's no sensation of strength, which means it can't be used as a charm. What is its use?
Klein thought of something else as he summoned a backup paper angel from his junk pile and cast it onto the illusory black fog. The moment the two made contact, they immediately fused together. The paper figurine quickly turned black and appeared serene and quiet. On its back grew white feathers that were stained with pale yellow oil. Such a change was only maintained for a second. The paper figurine returned to its original state, but it didn't seem corporeal, as though it was half illusory. Apart from that, there were feather-like patterns that covered the paper figurine's back.
What can this be used for?
Klein made the mutated paper figurine land back in his palm. He didn't dare to use divination to determine its effects, afraid to see the scene from his dream before, allowing the now prepared object from deep inside the black fog to invade where he was. After repeated checks, Klein used his knowledge in mysticism to determine something.
This doesn't contain any powers itself, but it's substantially unique. Perhaps it can create special effects that are related to the undead domain when used as a paper figurine substitute or paper angel. It's like my adventurer's harmonica. Although it doesn't contain any strength, it can summon a messenger with great strength.
Klein immediately put away the mutated paper figurine and began interpreting the scene from his dream.
Black mausoleum, open coffins, corpses with feathers on their back, black fog emanating deep inside. These revelations seem to point towards death, or something important that death left behind. Or perhaps it's a certain product of the numinous episcopate's artificial death. Right, why did I find what I saw familiar?
Klein carefully recalled and quickly found an answer. He had seen a similar scene in a particular divination a long time ago. That time, the contents of his divination was the result of hiding matters related to Mr. Azik from the Nighthawks. Back then, he had seen two scenes in his dream. One was of himself falling into a sea of blood and being pulled out by Azak. The other was them finding themselves in a dark and gloomy mausoleum, looking as though they were searching for something. Klein had once tried interpreting it, believing that the first scene represented him in danger and being rescued by Mr. Azik. The second scene represented them exploring a mausoleum or somewhere that symbolized a mausoleum together. The former had been verified during the meteor that came falling from the skies in Backland. The latter finally revealed clues today.
Could it be that the place that Mr. Azik and I will be exploring is the mausoleum that I just saw? But this mausoleum is very dangerous. The object in the deepest part of the black fog has a very high level. It's only slightly weaker than true deities. Furthermore, it's filled with malevolence.
Klein knitted his brows bit by bit, believing that their exploration together wasn't naturally a good thing. This made him believe that it was necessary for him to stop Mr. Azik. However, he also suspected that the divination scene he saw couldn't be avoided. Otherwise, a worse outcome would happen in a dramatic way of having destiny unfold.
At least during my first divination, there was only the exploration scene and no appearance of danger. Perhaps there's a way to circumvent it. This might be why seers are often so vague. At times, being too clear might backfire.
Klein planned on vaguely mentioning his dream without providing any interpretation when he met Mr. Azik again and allowing him to share his views. After making up his mind, Klein leaned back and looked at the dome of the magnificent palace before vanishing from above the gray fog. Light, shattered light, and the pure light of dawn emitted from the elder of the six-member council, the other demon hunter, Waite Shermont's body. It dissolved the white feathers that grew out of the pores of his skin as he suppressed the subsequent squirming of his flesh and blood. His arm muscles swelled as he pulled the bowstring of the dragon-slaying bow, allowing silver electric bolts and the dawn of light to mesh into a dazzling arrow. The arrow flew out and instantly reached the altar, which was piled with monster skulls. It hit the heavy, iron-black coffin. Silently, the arrow's beam dimmed and vanished without leaving any effect. No, the area around the altar was turning darker and more gloomy. Inside the iron-black coffin, a sound that resembled bones rubbing against each other sounded,
"Why? Why are you disturbing my slumber?"
Upon hearing this, Waite's heart instantly became heavy. This was because there was no hint of hiding its malevolent intent, and that it also meant that the former chief might have transformed into a monster. The City of Silver's attempt at salvation had once again failed. With a bang, the coffin's lid flew up and shattered into pieces. A large wave of black fog emanated out from beneath in an incessant manner. Amidst this scene, Waite saw a figure slowly stand up from within the coffin. He was nearly 4 meters tall, and his limbs were long. His body was covered in white feathers that were tainted with faint yellow oil. Behind his back were thin, illusory black tubes that connected out into infinity. Behind the 3 members of the 6-member council, a huge wave stirred in the pitch-black river. All sorts of arms, tentacles, and veins surged over. At this moment, Waite saw the chief's body transform rapidly and saw his bulging muscles tear his clothes inch by inch. Chapter 902. Shadow. In just a blink of an eye, Colin Iliad had transformed into a 4-meter-tall giant. His skin was bluish-black and muscular. Every inch of his skin, pores, and flesh seemed to violate the normal confines of a human body. It was a unique combination that possessed an unimaginable shock factor. This wasn't something that could be described superficially or in dimensions, as apart from quantitative terms like length, breadth, height, there was information, strength, and spirituality as measurement quantities. They were directly presented and seemed to be rich with complicated mystical patterns, symbols, and labels. But in fact, there wasn't any change. The former was just a partial image that humans received, due to them lacking the ability to sense and discern him. But even so, to face such a creature directly, humans without any godhood would still be corrupted by the spirituality, having their minds thrashed. A common outcome would either be death on the spot or going completely mad, and it was precisely due to this fact that this creature was known in mysticism as mythical creature. However, at that moment, Colin Iliad's head didn't experience any obvious changes. All it did was swell up significantly, and the area from his forehead to nose cracked open with a black, vertical, eye-like rift. Before reaching sequence 2, the mythical creature form of a demigod was incomplete. Faced with a powerhouse of this level, the advantages and disadvantages of taking such a form was obvious. On the one hand, this enhanced one's strength and level significantly. On the other hand, it would result in intense madness and provide strong inclinations towards losing control. It was a non-trivial test of one's rationality. It wasn't something those with insufficient willpower could withstand. Therefore, most saints would consider transforming into an incomplete mythical creature only if they were forced into a corner. And it wouldn't just be the transformation of a particular part of their bodies. To them, such an action was an attempt at dancing on the edge of a knife. It easily led to a loss of control. Therefore, caution was imperative. Hefan his pada baha. Most of the time, there were 2 extremes. One extreme was the minority who indulged in their desires and expressed their evil side fully. The other was the kind who had extremely strong willpower and a resilient mind. Once the former produced the mythical creature form, it was equivalent to them losing control with no way of transforming back. The latter could use their mythical creature form as a rather normal battle tactic, without the fear of losing control and the threat of madness. Of course, something rather normal wasn't normal. It still wasn't something that could be used frequently. This was because, for people who danced at the edge of the abyss, They would only deepen the erosion on them with each attempt. It wasn't something that could be completely avoided just because they could handle the negative effects. Among the City of Silver's 6-member council, Chief Klein Moretti was one of the few who could control his mythical creature form as a demon hunter. He held the 2 swords that were slathered with different ointments. Just taking a step forward with his right foot sent the land shaking as he leaped up towards the top of the altar. He then pounced towards the former chief, whose body was covered in white feathers. His giant-like body's interior and exterior produced dawn-like light that scattered the surrounding darkness, purifying the harrowing creatures that were in the illusionary river behind them. At the same time, Wade Shermont kept drawing his dragon-slaying bow, strafing around the former chief that had transformed into an unknown monster with blinding silver lightning arrows. Lovia had already closed her eyes. The 5-meter-tall, silver-armored knight behind her had phased away. Dragging the illusory great sword, it charged straight at the altar, producing cracks that overflowed with silver light. In addition to that, at the shepherd elder's feet, the shadows that curled into a bundle suddenly began squirming as though they had come to life. It quickly left Lovia, and amidst the environment intermixing with darkness and the dawn, it followed the eeriness and quickly headed for the iron-black coffin above the altar. However, its target didn't seem to be the mutated former chief, but the thin, illusory black tubes that were stabbed into his body while extending into infinity. Moments after Klein returned to the real world, he heard the loud sounds of waves crashing. He heard the prostitutes on the streets screaming in horror without any signs of calming down. Slightly surprised, he walked to the window and, through the gap of 2 messily built buildings, saw lead-colored clouds stacked together as waves swarmed the area beyond Poto Harbor. A black hurricane extended from the surface of the sea to the air, tainted with dark silver lightning as it silently destroyed everything. It was like a door that led to the apocalypse had finally been opened, and inside the port city the void had turned translucent. Skulls with open mouths, vines with baby faces, bloody arms, and strange, slimy tentacles with teeth were slamming at the boundary between the illusory and reality. It was thrilling and horrendous. Tenches, this made many pirates tremble in the knees as they didn't dare stay on the streets. All of them rushed into nearby buildings. Tenches, the seemingly invisible wraiths and shadows flew around, appearing from time to time. Coming close to the ears of different targets, they attempted to scream but were unable to make contact. At that moment, Poto Harbor seemed to fall into the hell known as the underworld. It was eerie, dark, chaotic, and crazy. Klein frowned slightly, having had a guess as to what was happening.
This also means that the mausoleum is indeed concealed somewhere in the Berserk Sea. It's probably something that Death left back then. Of course, this might not be at odds with the product of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project. The 2 might be fused together.
Klein retracted his gaze and quickly set up a ritual and sacrificed Ozik's copper whistle to the mysterious space above the gray fog. It was to prevent the unknown, strange, and evil object from locking onto him. After doing that, he looked out of the window at the abnormality that was gradually calming down. He said with a self-deprecating laugh,
That's such an endearing welcome. The Numinous Episcopate will definitely notice the abnormality of the Berserk Sea. I wonder what actions they will take.
Above the illusory pitch-black river, the waves slowly calmed down. The arms, vines, and tentacles that attempted to grab at something were either vaporized or had no choice but to retract themselves. Around the altar, the land was already covered in cracks. There were white feathers stained with yellow oil everywhere. Klein Moretti in his giant form had stabbed both swords into the former chief's body, pinning the rotting monster that wasn't shorter than him onto the collapsed altar. Wade Shermont's dragon-slaying bow had already condensed a silver arrow of light that was filled with a wrathful aura, aiming it at the head of the former chief, which only had tiny pieces of flesh hanging off it. The shadow that Lovia had produced had successfully arrived at the altar under the Silver Knight's cover. While the other 2 elders weren't paying attention, the shadow leaped and pounced at the black tubes that extended into infinity from the former chief's body. With the incorporeal tubes approaching, the shadow's color darkened. The blackness seemed to embody the most corrupt and evil thoughts of humanity. At this moment, a deep voice resounded around the altar.
Fate.
The area in front of the shadow instantly darkened before realizing that it had pounced on the giant-like Colin Iliad. Colin looked down at it, his eyes lit with a pure brilliance. It was like the first sliver of light that illuminates the darkness on an extended night. The light grew brighter as it blasted out of the mausoleum, causing the basement of the City of Silver's spire to produce an even brighter and dazzling light that met with it. When the two met in midair, they fell back down, landing upon Colin Iliad's massive body. The pitch-black shadow evaporated with a sizzle, and the distortion and squirming weakened until they completely vanished. Demon Hunter Colin turned back to glance at Lovia without a word or expression. It was as though nothing had happened. He quickly retracted his gaze and directed the remnant beam straight into the former chief's dual swords. Lovia stood there with her eyes closed, without showing any signs of panic or fear. Instead, she slowly sighed. In the City of Generosity Biome, Alger Wilson circled around many times in order to escape any imaginary trackers or monitors before arriving at the artisan's residence. He pulled the doorbell. He had heard that the artisan had recently been infected by a disease, and strange snoopers had appeared in the vicinity. Alger's first suspicion was the demoness sect, but on careful thought, he felt that the artisan had no way to withstand the temptation of their charm based on his preferences. There was no need for the demonesses to go through such a complicated and roundabout manner. All they needed to do was curl their fingers and showcase their charm, and he would divulge and agree to everything. Therefore, Alger believed that there was another reason for the matter. He needed to see it for himself to prevent the delivery of the mystical item from being delayed. He didn't wish to lose the characteristic and materials for no good reason. Amidst the ringing of the doorbell, the artisan's main door opened. A thin and tanned middle-aged glanced at Alger and said,
"Why are you here?"
This person was none other than Artisan Cielf, who had worked with Alger for many years. His background was unknown. "Now?" Lysier asked, seemingly casual.
Didn't you say you were sick?
Cielf yawned and said,
"I'm already better."
Alger was taken aback as he looked around.
Where's that strange snooper?
Cielf's eye bags were a little puffy as his brown eyes revealed looks of fatigue and impatience.
Who the hell knows? There's been no sign of the snooper anyway. In short, I'll be moving soon. It's too dangerous here.
Alger heaved a sigh of relief.
That's good.
He paused for a moment before saying,
Aren't you inviting me for a cup?
A fellow like you, who only seeks high-proof alcohol, has no way of appreciating fine wine.
Cielf pulled at his flaxen-colored hair and moved to the side to make way. Alger walked in staidly, and with just one glance, he had taken in the entire area into his eyes. Chapter 903, Scholar-Type Bishop. Cielf's residence wasn't messy and dirty like most bachelors. Things were placed neatly, and there wasn't any dust on any surfaces. After all, as an artisan, he didn't lack money. Many of his actions simply had the necessity that secrets were kept, so it wasn't convenient for him to hire a large number of fixed servants. Therefore, he had no choice but to hire help who were paid by the hour. Scanning the area, Alger discovered nothing that was off from his previous visit. The furnishing was extremely simple without any expensive ornaments, oil paintings, or sculptures. It resembled the residence of an ordinary person. Of course, Alger knew very well that Cielf definitely deserved the title of being a tycoon. He just didn't care about putting on a so-called decent image. He was willing to spend hundreds of pounds for a bottle of limited edition wine or gift a mistress a house, but he would never waste a single pence on expensive carpets, porcelain, gold-inlaid cutlery, or paintings of famous artists. Alger's expression remained unchanged, but his verbal and body language indicated that he was coming in simply to get a free cup of wine.
A cup of Sonia blood wine.
Cielf shrugged and said,
You should feel lucky. I don't have the habit of keeping anti-proof.
He walked to the tiny bar counter in the living room and took out a bottle of exquisite Sonia blood wine. He then overturned 2 cups. Finding a sofa to sit down, Alger took the opportunity to raise his hand to massage his neck as though to relieve any discomfort in his neck. Using the cover of this action, he naturally took a glance at his surroundings, quickly making an observation of all the spots where he hadn't been able to see previously. As Sea Elf couldn't be bothered to decorate his residence much, Algier quickly completed his attempt as his gaze was fixed onto a glass window of a cupboard a distance away for a second. Through the glass he saw some dried grass and flowers. There were red-rimmed flowers, blood moon flowers, and monkey-faced tree leaves. Their common characteristic was that they were common in the southern continent, but they were practically not seen in the northern continent. Algier retracted his gaze as he silently watched Sea Elf carry the bottle of wine and wine glasses over. Reaching out to take the glass, he began idly chatting about the recent developments at sea until the small, half-filled bottle of Sonia blood wine was finished. Upon seeing this, Algier smiled and bade farewell before leaving. 5 minutes after he left, Sea Elf, who had silently sat down to indulge in his tipsy experience, suddenly stood up, walked to the staircase, and opened a wooden door that led to the cellar.
Did he suspect anything?
No.
Regardless, this place is no longer suitable for you to live in. You need to move away as soon as possible.
I still have certain commissions that I haven't completed.
You don't have to. It's not like you will contact them again. You will receive a new life.
All right.
2 buildings away, Algier sat on a long bench in someone's garden, cupping his right hand to his ear as he heard the conversation that came with the wind. West Balaam, Baron's Harbor, outside a seemingly ordinary house. Danitz wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked at Anderson, feeling unnerved.
It's really due to your bad relationship with the Church of Knowledge that you're egging me on to come here to request for a language comprehension charm?
Anderson said in a self-deprecating and unfazed manner.
You shouldn't describe it as bad.
Danitz blurted out, cutting off his sentence.
Then hostile?
Anderson shot him a glance and said,
The negative effects of your boxing glove might not be as easily bearable as you imagine it to be.
He paused and added with a chuckle.
A more accurate description is that, be it me or the people from the Church of Knowledge, neither one of us wishes to interact with one another.
Danitz used one hand to clench his boxing glove and said, seemingly stumped,
But how should I request for the charm? Do I just head straight to a clergyman of the Church of an Orthodox God and mention something about mysticism? I'll end up locked up.
Danitz was somewhat rash at the moment, but he was in no way dumb. Afi Anderson threw up his hands.
Simple. Just directly mention my name. Then indicate that you came to West Balaam for some pressing matter and do not have the time to learn Dutanese, nor do you dare to hire a local interpreter. Therefore, all you could do was seek their help, hoping that you could receive a few language comprehension charms. During this process, you must showcase your knowledge of many Northern Continent languages, making the priests know that it's not that you lack the ability to learn Dutanese, but that you just lack the time to do it. Then, they will test you. When that happens, all you need to do is get a good score and you'll receive the charms.
Test. Upon hearing this familiar term, Danitz's temples throbbed as he forced a smile.
You aren't going yourself because you're afraid of the tests, aren't you?
His original intent was to randomly use some words to conceal his discomfort, but he ended up seeing Anderson's expression freeze.
From the looks of it, there's still something you're afraid of.
Danitz chortled inwardly as he was suddenly filled with confidence. He took large strides into the ordinary house and discovered that its interior was more of an amalgamation of classrooms and not a land of preaching for the Church of Knowledge in Balaam. Then he saw a grizzled elder. Although this man wasn't wearing the clergyman robes of the Church of Knowledge, just his unique scholarly air convinced Danitz that he was at least a bishop. He had experienced similar vibes from his captain. Without covering himself with a hood, Danitz walked over with a smile while dressed in a commoner's attire.
Hello there.
The elder silently watched him approach before slowly saying,
Danitz.
Danitz paused and froze on the spot. His mind was filled with questions like, He knows me? How does he know me? Isn't my bounty only limited to the sea? The elder glanced at him and asked,
You are here for language comprehension charms?
Danitz nodded with a blank look, suddenly having the feeling that he had zero secrets in front of the elder.
Yes.
The scholarly old gentleman nodded gently.
Are you planning on heading to the places ruled by Katamia and May Sanchez?
Danitz continued his blank expression.
Yes.
The elder took out 4 brass charms from his pocket.
These can be used for 2 months. They should be enough.
Danitz received it with a blank look and after a few seconds said,
That's it? It's that simple? Isn't there supposed to be a test?
the scholarly elder asked with a smile.
You don't want it?
Danitz suddenly shook his head, and before his brain could react, he had already asked.
No, it's not that. How do you know me? How do you know I want language comprehension charms?
The elder wore a few looks of pity in his eyes as he slowly said,
Your captain contacted me. She said that you refused to stop no matter how much they called out to you when you left the ship, rushing straight into the harbor. She had actually prepared a few language comprehension charms for you.
As he spoke, the man shook his head, the look in his eyes somewhat ambivalent. It was as though he was looking at a student who was often careless in class.
I should have long realized that. Captain is such a meticulous person, it's impossible for her not to consider the problem of the language barrier.
Danitz resisted the urge to slap himself. Yeelaime, en katacht, geacht, lolen fruzable. Mida saw the changes in Danitz's expression. He shook his head and asked,
It probably wasn't your own idea to seek help here, right? I was about to use divination to find you.
Danitz immediately replied.
Ah, right, it was suggested by Anderson Hood.
The elder was taken aback for a second before his expression turned ashen. At that moment, Anderson was sitting outside in the shade. He had snapped a tree branch and was casually drawing on a barren patch among the grass as he leisurely waited for Danitz to come out. He had no doubts that this unqualified hunter could obtain the language comprehension charms. This was because, as long as Danitz mentioned Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina, everything would become much simpler. The only difference was how many rounds of tests he needed to take. Just as he finished drawing King of the North Ulysson's head, he heard a familiar gait coming from the inside. Anderson's branch-wielding hand paused for a second. When he looked up and turned to the door, he saw Danitz holding a stack of paper, walking over with mixed emotions. Anderson gave a sincere smile, having zero concern over the failure to obtain the language comprehension charms.
You failed the test?
Danitz shook his head blankly.
There wasn't a test.
Anderson was first taken aback, as he asked with immediate enlightenment,
Help from your captain?
Danitz tersely confirmed it as he handed the stack of paper to Anderson and said,
This is what the bishop wishes me to inform you. A real hunter doesn't only rely on instinct or solely focus on the prey's information. They also need to learn how to grasp the prey's psyche and use all kinds of additional information. This is the information he wants to give you.
Anderson's expression became contorted for a brief moment before it was restored to normal. He chuckled and said,
Thankfully, that's not much.
Danitz's lips quivered as he finally held back the laughter that rose within him. He said with seriousness,
That's only the table of contents. That bishop said that you should try to finish reading all the books mentioned in it within 2 years.
Anderson's smile finally froze. Desi Bay, Eskelson Harbor. Klein was like any normal southern continent tourist. He bought tickets to East Balaam, boarded a hybrid steam and sail liner with many cannons. EC, with a hum, the ship left the harbor and quickly entered the Berserk Sea. Midway, Klein discovered the Loan Kingdom's Desi fleet patrolling the safe sea route as though they were guarding against something.
From the looks of it, the abnormality in the Berserk Sea has garnered the attention of the Loan military. This way, the numinous episcopate likely has no way of investigating these waters without problems. Of course, a fleet is unable to monitor the entire stretch of the sea route.
Klein stood inside his cabin as he looked at the scenery outside, thinking in enlightenment and poignancy. At this moment he heard stacked illusory pleas. He hurriedly headed above the gray fog to check on it. The prayer was from the hanged man. He requested Mr. Fool to inform the hermit that the artisan was suspected to be controlled by a cult or secret organization, and that he wished to receive some help from her. Chapter 904. Analysis. Don't tell me that this matter was targeted at me? Klein was alarmed.
It really is possible.
He thought, I need to be careful. He then walked towards the door. After a frozen moment, Amirius said in a deep tone,
Tell me the specifics.
After hearing the hangman's prayers, Klein subconsciously rebutted his request, believing that it would delay an opportunity, causing unnecessary losses. He then calmed down, believing that with Mr. Hangman's attention to detail and experience, it was impossible for him to commit such a simple error, since he believed that he definitely had his reasons for requesting the hermit's help instead of the world. This also means that Mr. Hangman has determined that the matter hasn't reached a critical state that requires immediate action. He even wishes to observe further to find more clues and details. Besides, since Ma'am Hermit had offered to provide help in advance, it means that she believes that, for the time being, her region of activity would overlap with Mr. Hanged Man's. If anything really happens, she would be able to rush there at the fastest speed possible.
Or does she too have powers similar to teleport? But that's a very low possibility.
Klein tapped the edges of the modeled table, believing that he should trust Mr. Hanged Man's experience. Of course, this also included the fact that Mr. Hanged Man hadn't described in detail about his discoveries or areas of suspicion, preventing him from inferring or divining the truth of the matter. As his thoughts stirred, Klein threw the Hanged Man's prayer scene into the crimson star representing the hermit. As he was waiting for Admiral of Stars to reply, he suddenly saw the star representing the sun suddenly contract and expand as it produced stacked layers of prayers.
The City of Silver's exploration of the former chief's mausoleum has some preliminary results.
Klein made a guess as he emanated his spirituality over. In accordance with his expectations, Little Sun began recounting everything that had happened after the 3 members of the 6-member council opened the former chief's mausoleum. This included encountering the souls of their deceased relatives, the river they crossed which hid countless strange creatures, and how they faced the incomplete mythical creature form of the former chief whose body was covered in white feathers. It also included Shepherd Lovia's separation of a shadow in an attempt to pounce onto the illusory tubes that extended out of the former chief's body. However, she was stopped when Colin Iliad used the fate siphon charm, swapping his and the former chief's fate for a brief moment, causing a difference in outcomes.
Thin, illusory black tubes. White feathers stained with pale yellow oil. This sounds familiar. Yes, wasn't this the main characteristic in the scene I saw when I divined the abnormality with Azek's copper whistle? And the reason that former chief built the mausoleum was to switch to Sequence 3 Ferryman of the Death pathway.
As Klein listened, his mind raced, joining the dots together and considering what kind of conclusion he could receive from that. Soon, he had a bold guess.
The mutation of the City of Silver's former chief had a certain connection with the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project.
Although this conclusion sounded inexplicable and unbelievable since the City of Silver was situated in the completed, isolated, forsaken land of the gods, it was a place that could only be entered through certain means via the giant King's Court and ruins of the Battle of the Gods. Even the 7 deities couldn't find it or have the power to infiltrate it. However, the numerous similarities made Klein, who was sensitive to coincidences, combine the actions of Shepherd Elder Lovia in the operation and eliminate the other possibilities so as to seriously consider what the 2 seemingly unconnected matters might possibly point towards. From the scene that he received from divination and the experiences of having white feather grow from the pores of the back of his hands when he summoned the failed product of artificial death, as well as the encounter of the 3 City of Silver elders, he began suspecting that the Numinous Episcopate's attempt might have achieved success to a certain degree. Through a series of sacrificial rituals and the transformation of their own high-sequence beyonders, they influenced Death's remains via backward propagation, causing that abstract, illusory uniqueness which represented a deity's authority to generate some form of sentience. This allowed the object that was only a totem and a concept to come to life. Hence, this unintelligent object that couldn't be considered artificial death had begun assimilating the entire ritual, eagerly exerting its influence on lower sequence beyonders of the same pathway. After reaching certain conditions, the object hidden in the depths of the black fog could extend thin, illusory black tubes, establishing connections with the target, and draw upon their strength to transform their bodies. And this method might involve the underworld or something special about Death's domain. It could circumvent the force that isolated the forsaken land of the gods and make effective contact with the beings within.
Therefore, the shadow that Shepherd Elder Lovia had produced was a bestowment of the true Creator. Its goal was to follow the thin, illusory black tubes on the former chief's body and trace the remains of the corrupted Death. Perhaps this was how the Mother Tree of Desire replaced the chained god back then and seized the corresponding authority.
Thankfully, the current chief of the City of Silver has a very clear mind. He knew ahead of time to seek out the secret existence backing Little Sun for help. By using the Fate Siphon charm, he remarkably foiled the true Creator's ploy.
From the looks of it, the two powerful sealed artifacts of the City of Silver are good at purification. They're able to stop the shadow that can corrupt Death's remains. As the fool, I seem to have crossed the true Creator once again. Of course, Aemon will be the one taking the blame since the Worm of Time was contributed by him.
Through Little Sun's description and relying on his own interference, Klein roughly figured out the hidden conflict that happened during the City of Silver's exploratory operation. Meanwhile, he also gained a first look at Shepherd Elder's mental condition. To Lovia, thin, illusory black tubes that lead to the outside world was undoubtedly the key to the City of Silver's escape from the forsaken land of the gods. Therefore, she was very certain of her actions this time, without showing any signs of regret. She would only believe that the chief was the one who shattered that hope.
It's not too terrifying to have someone do evil deeds. What's most terrifying is when people who have a martyrish mentality do evil they believe to be right.
Klein couldn't help but sigh inwardly. As for why Little Sun knew what happened inside the mausoleum so clearly, it was obvious that Chief Colin Iliad had informed him during a casual chat. At this point, Derek had already recounted how the three elders had retrieved a special sealed artifact. It was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by the former chief that had fused with his bones. The former chief was from the Giant Pathway, beginning from Sequence 9 Warrior to Sequence 4 Demon Hunter. The Ferryman potion he consumed corresponds to the Death Pathway's Sequence 3. The two Beyonder characteristics mixed together must be weirder and more varied than a single pathway. Together with the added effects of artificial death, the final sealed artifact must be very powerful. Of course, the negative effects will probably be equally powerful.
Yes, back when the Black Illusory River was described, the various weird creatures likely corresponded to the underworld. This is similar to the scene I saw in the Berserk Sea. It's also similar in effect to what Miss Sharon's mystical item created.
As Klein thought about it, he listened to Little Sun wrap up the topic of the exploration before mentioning the monster known as Shapeshifter. After Derek finished describing it, Klein felt that shapeshifters were very likely bizarro banes. He hurriedly summoned a gold coin from the junk pile and did a divination to confirm his guess.
With Little Sun's current strength, there's no way for him to head to that city to hunt it. I can only wait until that chief prays to the fool once again or seeks help via Little Sun. Anyway, there's no rush. I haven't found the Spirit World Plunderer yet.
Klein nodded indiscernibly. After requesting Mr. Fool to pass the corresponding information to Mr. World, Derek said that he had enough points and could soon exchange for the Beyonder characteristic for Sequence 5 Vampire and complete the three-party transaction, so he requested that Mr. Moon prepare himself. On the Future, which was slowly cruising across the waters of the Rorstead archipelago, Admiral of Stars Catalea thanked Mr. Fool and nudged the glasses on her nose. Opening the window to the captain's cabin, she shouted to everyone,
Turn towards Bayham.
After issuing the command, this pirate admiral curled the corners of her mouth. She finally had the chance to establish a long-term cooperation with an artisan. But at that moment, she suddenly thought of a problem.
If she easily received the help of an artisan, would Frank Lee, who hadn't been able to obtain a Sequence 5 potion formula, attempt to make the druid beyonder characteristic into an item to expedite his paused experiments? That's not a good thing.
Katia subconsciously raised her hand and pinched her forehead. On the liner, Klein, who had finished handling the matters, focused on enjoying his trip. Due to the Berserk Sea's abnormal change in weather, the liner he was on board had chosen to take a further and more roundabout sea route that was much safer. Furthermore, it was to dock at a harbor named Halman for the night. Klein didn't alight and remained at a window-side table at the upper levels restaurant to have his dinner. While waiting for his food, he casually looked out the window and took in the local night skyline. Suddenly, he discovered a suspicious figure with a luggage bag preparing to board the ship. The reason why he appeared suspicious wasn't only because the man was wearing a black overcoat and tall top hat, but that he wore a scarf that wrapped his face, hiding his physical features. All that was left were a pair of eyes, and that pair of eyes were peeled to the ground, preventing anyone from discerning his actual appearance. Chapter 905, Psychological Blind Spot. Based on his experience from watching many detective animations, Klein believed that someone who wore a scarf to conceal his face and hid his physical characteristics with an overcoat was likely problematic. He probably hid an unspeakable secret, especially when it wasn't winter yet and the temperature in the Berserk Sea couldn't be considered cold.
However, this has nothing to do with me. Even if a locked room murder mystery happens, the one having a headache would be the captain. I should head above the gray fog later to do a divination and see if this trip will be smooth.
Klein didn't mind the matter, but he still thought about it conscientiously. He retracted his gaze and looked at the Desi roasted fish that was being served by the waiter. After having dinner, he returned to his cabin and completed a divination above the gray fog. He obtained the conclusion that there wouldn't be drastic changes to the environment he was in and that everything would happen smoothly. This allowed Klein to fall asleep peacefully without relying on cogitation as he slept till daybreak. With a whistle from the steam engine, the liner began moving and departing Halman Harbor. The harbor could still be vaguely seen as Klein saw a figure there. The figure wore a white shirt and a dark blue coat. He had a rather high nose, deeply recessed eyes, light blue eyes, and brown curly hair. His face was rather cut, and his chin was slightly raised. He gave off a supercilious look. With a sweep of his gaze, he quickly locked onto the liner which Klein was on. At this moment, the sky suddenly darkened, as though a door leading into the pitch-black land of illusions had formed. A deafening typhoon stirred up from the seabed, surging upwards with massive amounts of blue mass. Dark lightning flashed like rifts in the void. They kept appearing and kept healing themselves until they disappeared. This completely blocked the vision of those on the liner and at the harbor, putting them in two seemingly different worlds. The Berserk Sea had once again shown its horror. The liner failed to avoid or resist, and it could only continue cruising forward along the safe sea route that had relatively weaker storms.
What a coincidence. This likely isn't a coincidence.
Standing behind the window of his cabin, Klein first sighed inwardly, before coming to the conclusion that this sudden anomaly in the Berserk Sea was due to unnatural reasons. Although it was common for the weather in the Berserk Sea to change suddenly without notice, to actually change at a particular point in time still left one suspicious.
The man at the dock is tracking the suspicious tourist from last night? And that tourist decided to change the weather upon realizing that he had been exposed, doing so that he can force the liner to leave? And if that really were the case, it means that the suspicious passenger who hid his face with a scarf might very well be a demigod or someone who carried a Grade 1 sealed artifact.
Klein made a guess when he made the connection. After all, with Klein's present strength and items, it was impossible for him to trigger such a weather anomaly without the use of Sea God's scepter. Of course, He also had other means, like throwing out Azek's copper whistle to see if he could cause the entire Berserk Sea to go berserk.
Seriously? I just want to be a normal tycoon that's heading to the southern continent. Why would I encounter a pursuit at the level of demigods? Sigh, I'm under too much stress that my sequence doesn't deserve.
Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and finally chose to believe the divination he made last night. Amidst the storm, the wobbling liner cruised along a rather calm stretch with apocalyptic scenes around it, and most of the tourists wore calm looks as though they were very accustomed to such conditions. Only a few people who were on their first trip across the Berserk Sea were trembling, grabbing tightly to anything they could grab at. Time ticked by as the gales and lightning gradually calmed down. Bit by bit, the sky brightened. At this moment, Klein, who was on the deck, felt his spiritual perception trigger. He subconsciously looked in the direction of Halman Harbor. Above the undulating dark blue waves, beneath white scattered clouds, there was a white radiant flame flying over at high speeds from afar. The flame increased in size and became increasingly clearer until it revealed its complete form. It was a gigantic flaming spear. The flaming spear tore across the sky and landed at the bow of the liner's deck. However, it didn't ignite anything. It burnt through half a wooden plank and spread out before materializing into a figure. The figure had a high nose, deeply recessed eyes, and blue eyes. He was none other than the man who had previously appeared at the dock. He looked middle-aged as he slowly surveyed the area and walked through the wide-eyed and agape tourists before walking into the cabin. The similarly agape Dwayne Dantes silently heaved a sigh of relief when he confirmed that the person wasn't here for him.
The way he appeared sure is cool, as expected of a demigod. Now, the only issue is that they do not come to blows. Even if the conflict cannot be helped, it's best they go to a neighboring sea to fight. Otherwise, there's no way this ship can withstand it. I can teleport away quite successfully, but all these tourists, I'll only be able to save a few.
Klein habitually drew the sign of the crimson moon on his chest, praying for the goddess to bless them. Just as he had such a thought, he saw a figure fly out of the cabin, slamming heavily onto the deck. It was none other than the suspicious tourist who had covered his face with a scarf. This man had already revealed half his face. The tip of his nose was red, and he had a thick beard around his mouth with saliva staining them. His nearly triangular eyes were filled with horror. He held his hands to the deck as he kept crawling backward. At the cabin's entrance, the middle-aged man with the high nose and blue eyes slowly walked out. He spoke in Intis with a heavy voice.
Who got you to carry that item and put on such a disguise?
The suspicious tourist shook his head frantically.
No, I don't know. He was also wearing the same. He gave me £100 to take this ship to the southern continent before returning by myself.
The middle-aged man silently watched with his penetrating glare that seemed to tear through his soul. This made the tourist break out into a sweat as his body convulsed. He once again stammered his explanation, but there weren't any changes to it. The man retracted his gaze before his body burst into white, radiant flames. Following that, he transformed into a gigantic flaming spear and shot towards the region where Halman Harbor was. The flaming spear quickly disappeared into the distance, leaving a twinkling speck. During this entire process, apart from at the very beginning, the demigod didn't take a second look at the surrounding tourists. It was as though they never existed.
A simple but smart ruse. By getting someone to disguise as himself and board the ship, then using certain means to control the weather, thus creating proof that he's on the ship, but in actual fact, he had been at the harbor the entire time. Once the enemy starts the pursuit, he can then attempt to escape.
Enlightened, Klein made a judgment. This made him suspect if the pursuee was once a conspirer, magician, or other. Beyond her, that was good at coming up with ruses. As for the person who transformed into a burning white spear, his arrogance, detestable nature, and his usage of the Intis language had made Klein believe that he was probably a demigod from the Hunter pathway. It was possible that he was an iron-blooded knight.
I've no idea why there was a conflict.
Klein shook his head and returned to his cabin. On the deck, the tourists finally snapped to their senses as they discussed the supernatural phenomenon they had just seen in Murmurs. A person could transform into a flame, and the flame could reform into a human. Amidst the noisy commotion, the liner continued cruising forward on the safe sea route. It didn't encounter any accidents midway, and it arrived at another harbor at midnight. Like usual, Klein didn't alight, afraid that he would encounter something. He took out his gold pocket watch and opened it to determine the time to head to the restaurant.
Another half an hour.
Klein silently muttered to himself as he looked up and out the window. At this moment, many tourists who were bound for this harbor were heading for the dock along the gangway with their luggage in hand. As he swept his gaze, Klein's gaze suddenly stopped on a figure. The figure wore a black bonnet. He had dark, golden sideburns. His lips were tightly pursed, and his facial features were clear and distinct, like an ancient classical sculpture without any wrinkles. He wasn't carrying any luggage, and soon he stepped onto the dock with the crowd, disappearing into the corner of the road. Klein just watched motionlessly, as though his body wasn't his. He felt every drop of his blood turn cold as a name appeared in his mind. Ince Zangwill. The street lamps on the harbor had already lit up. The liner's many windows also lit up in concert with them. Dwayne Dantes was waiting inside a first-class cabin in darkness and silence. Klein had already sat down without showing any emotion. All kinds of thoughts couldn't help but flash across his mind.
This is the first time I'm discovering signs of Ince Zangwill after the Great Smog of Backland. The demigod from before was probably tracking Ince Zangwill. His tricks are more profound than I thought. He found someone to disguise as him and gave him items not to divert his trackers but to create a mental blind spot. It made one subconsciously eliminate this ship from the possible options. He was here from the beginning. That coincidental change in weather was likely created by Ince Zangwill with 008. Why would he be pursued by an Inces Hunter demigod? What is he plotting?
Amidst his churning thoughts, Klein suddenly took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew it. Silently, Miss Messenger Renette Tinnecker, with her 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand, appeared before him. Klein opened his mouth before closing them again. Picking up a pen, he quickly wrote,
Mr. Dwayne Dantes has discovered traces of Ince Zangwill on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea.
Folding the letter, Klein handed it along with a gold coin to Miss Messenger.
Send it to the mailbox at Backland's 7 Pinster Street.
The 4 heads in Renette Tinnecker's hand turned at the same time as the 8 eyes looked at Klein. She didn't say anything and bit onto the letter and gold coin.